Hey everyone, welcome to WittCode, where in this video we're going to learn how to use Docker to build and run Node applications in development and production. So before we begin, let's talk about why we would Dockerize a Node app. Well, Dockerizing a project is always a good idea because it solves the "it only works on my machine" problem by providing a consistent and isolated environment. For example, Dockerizing a Node app will ensure that the program behaves the same on a Mac OS machine as it would on a Windows or Linux machine. But to start this project, let's begin by initializing an empty directory with npm init es6-y. This of course creates our package.json file. Next, let's install some dependencies. What we're going to be installing is both Express, and then we're also going to install NodeMon as a development dependency. So of course, Express will handle user requests, while NodeMon will provide live code updates to speed up the development process. Finally, let's create a source folder to hold our source code, including a server.js file. So I'm actually going to do that up here. So I'll make a source directory, and inside this server.js file. And inside this server.js file, let's just set up a simple Express application, which I'm actually just going to paste some code in here, and I'll go over what it does. So essentially we import Express, we set up an Express app, we retrieve the port and node environment from environment variables, which we'll set with Docker. We are just listening onto the main route, and all we will do is send back a 200 status code and saying hello there with the node environment, and then we just have the server running on port, whatever we provide as an environment variable. So now let's create a development node Docker image. So we're going to be working with development first. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to create a file called dockerfile.dev, which will build our node image for development. And so if you don't know, a Docker file is simply a text file that Docker uses to build a Docker image. So this Docker file will tell Docker how to build a Docker node image for development. And once again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some code and paste it in here. And so what each of these lines does is the first one here, it's telling Docker to build a node image using version 20 with the container also using Alpine Linux. And what that is basically just a small build environment that includes a minimal set of tools and libraries to have a node application up and running. Next, we set an environment variable of node-env to development and the port environment variable to 3000. Next, we set workdir, or working directory, to -app, and that makes it so any following commands, so copy, run, add, instructions like that, will be executed in the -app directory. So when we copy over this line, package.json, into our container, it'll be placed inside this app directory. When we run npm install, it'll be ran inside our app directory. And so, of course, this copies both our package.json and package.lock.json, and then we run npmi to install the node modules. And finally, we use cmd, and we're going to run an npm script called startdev. And so this cmd, what it does is it runs a command when the container's running. So when our container's up and running, it'll run this npm command. But let's create this npm, or this startdev npm script. And so I'm going to do that inside, of course, package.json. For scripts, we're just going to paste in startdev like this. So this script will be executed when the container is up and running, and what it'll do is just use NodeMon to run our Express server. And now let's set up a script to build this Docker image, or to have Docker build this for us. And like I said, we're going to do this with an npm script, and I'm going to paste this in and go over it. So what it is, I'm going to paste it in here, and it's called docker build dev. And essentially what this command does is it creates a Docker image from our dockerfile.dev file. So it reads the instructions in here to create this. And we also give the image a name of my node image dev, because we're in development, and we're giving it also a version number of 0.0.1. Now, if we run this npm command, we should get some output about what's going on. So we'll do npm run docker build dev, and it looks like we have an error right here. So get rid of this comma. All right, let's try running this again. So npm run docker build dev. We can see everything being, all the instructions in our Docker file being ran. So we could see we're copying over our package.json, running npm install, and so on. So this basically indicates that our image was built successfully. And now let's check the presence of this image by actually running docker images. So this command lists out all these images. And of course, a lot of these are ones that I've been working on for personal projects, but the one we're interested in is this one here, my node image dev. We can see it right here. We can see when it was created 17 seconds ago. The tag version is 0.0.1 and its size and so on. I believe lots of this size is also coming from the node modules, But now that we have our image up and running, which we can see, we need to create a container from it. And to do that, we'll use the docker run command. And we're also going to have a custom npm script to do this for us. So I'll paste this in here. And this is a pretty long one. And so what this basically does, so docker run right here creates a container from an image. And the image here is, I believe it's at the very end, it's my node image dev 0.0.1. So the image that we created in the build step, we're now using it here with docker run to create a container from it. We're setting up an interactive terminal, which basically means when it's running in the terminal down here, when we run this command, we can still issue commands like Control-C to exit out. We're mapping port 3000, which is essentially how we can, this is our host port. So on localhost 3000, we're going to interact with our container on port 3000. So this maps our host machine to the Docker container. We're naming the container my node C dev. And then these two are very important here. So we have two volumes that we've set up. So one of them is mapping the entire project to the app directory that we created in here. So this will essentially bring in all the code, all this stuff here into our container. And not only that, but it also maps it to it with a volume. So whenever we change code inside here on our host machine, it'll be reflected in the container. And then, but something that's very important too is we have a separate volume for our node modules, which we named my node modules like this. And we're mapping it to the container's node modules. And the reason we do this is because this operating system, the operating system that you run your code on, isn't always the same as the operating system in the Docker container. So for example, our Docker container is using Alpine Linux, whereas on here I'm using Mac OS. So certain libraries that you might install from npm could have different files installed depending on the operating system. And so this can cause errors. So you don't want to overwrite the node modules inside your container, but the ones on your host computer. But now we just need to run our application. So actually close this. So we just need to start our container. So it'll be npm run docker run dev. It looks like port 3000 is already in use. And I think that's from using this earlier. If I list out my containers, which I have a lot of, I can see 3000 right here that's been up for 3 days, my node C. So I'm going to do docker stop my node C, and then I'm going to remove it, docker rm my node C. And now let's run this command again. So npm run docker run dev. And actually, because of that, I think our container has still been created. It just isn't running. And we can list that with docker ps-a, and we can see it's here, it's created. But so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove it and create it again. So docker rm my node c dev. Now let's run this command one more time. Now we can see we're up and running, and we have server is running on port 3000. Now let's do a curl. So let's do curl localhost 3000. And we can see we get hello there, node.env is in development. And because we set up a volume and we're using nodemon, we can do live changes. Let's save this to running on port. Oh yeah, we can see that reflected instantly here. Now let's change this to hello there, how are you doing? We can see it was changed. And now if we do a curl, we get the update right here. So this is good for live code updates, but because we don't map our node modules folder to the one in Docker, which we can see inside this package.json because of this line here, when we install a package with npm, we'll need to install it both outside the container and inside the container. So say, for example, we wanted to install some random package, like say Terser plugin, or I don't think that exists. Let's say we want to install something like Webpack CLI. This will be reflected in our package.json, but because our node modules aren't mapped, if we import that in here, say we import Webpack CLI from Webpack CLI, we will get the app will crash because our module has not been found. So the way around this is we need to run npm install inside the container as well. And we can easily do that with the docker exec command. So if we run docker exec npm I like this, that will update our node modules. And now we can see that the module has been found. And if we say log out Webpack CLI just as a demonstration, we can see the class or just the object being logged out. But so this is all there is to get it up and running for development. So we're good for development now. But now let's create our production node Docker image. And to do that, first we're going to create another Docker file. So this one will be called dockerfile.prod, and there will be a few key differences between this file and our development file, which you'll see as we go along, but let me paste this in here. One of them we can see is we're setting the node environment to production. Everything else is about the same, except for we are running npm install with omit dev because we no longer want to bring in development dependencies. And this will make our build smaller because our node modules folder will be smaller. Next, because we're not going to be setting up any volumes for the code because this will be in production, we're just going to copy all our code into the container and then run npm start. And so I'm actually going to create all these scripts, just paste in all these scripts at once for production. So inside package.json, at the end of here, I'm just going to paste all these in. Let me fix up the spacing here. So we have our start command, our docker build command, and docker run. Essentially the same as these, except these don't have dev because they're going to be for production. And so our first script, here, let me cancel out this, I accidentally clicked something. But our first script here, all it does is runs the program with node, so it'll run our server file. And we're not using nodemon, of course, because this is going to be out in production. Next, in our docker build, we simply build the node image using the file, our docker file production, and we call it my node image 0.0.1. And just because I already have these images locally, I'm going to do 0.4 so I can build a new one. So change those to 0.0.4. And then, of course, we map it to port 3000. And I'm actually, because 3000 is in use, I'm going to do 3001 here. But so once again, we build the image from the Docker file here, and then we build our container from the Docker image. And we name it mynodec, and so on. And so if we want to build this, all we have to do is, of course, do npm run docker build. We can see everything running down here. And now let's build our container from that image. So it'll be npm run docker run, just like this. And so the reason actually that it's port 3000 is because we didn't set the environment variable in here to 3001. So this is why it's a good idea to have all your environment variables in one place. But let's cancel this out. And what we'll do is we'll stop our container with docker.mynodec, and then let's remove it, docker rm mynodec. And now let's remove our image, which we can do with docker rmi, and it's called my node image 0.0.4. So we've removed that, and we're doing that so now we can rebuild the image with the right environment variable. And now so we run npm run, I believe it's docker build, we called it, docker build. And we can see everything being created. Probably a lot of them are cached, the steps. And then we just do docker, or not docker, but npm run docker run, and should be the right. Now we can see port 3001. Let's open up another terminal, and here let's just curl localhost 3001, and we can see, hello there, node env is in production. So sweet, that means everything's working. But so this is how you create a node application with Docker for both production and development. If you want to support me, please consider downloading my Chrome extension called WittCode. The link is in the description. But besides that, thank you for liking and subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a good one.